Welcome, everyone. I am very excited to be here today and to talk with you about this approach, working with students and helping them to be successful. My intent is I will give a little bit more information about myself so you understand where I'm coming from. I'll talk a little bit about where this approach came from, kind of philosophy and history. And I'll share just briefly some of the research and data that supports these evidence-based practices. And then I would like to share a couple of two very specific examples directly from the curriculum that I've developed that I think are very representative of this approach and shows how this approach is a part of that. And then finish with some of these resources that align and help to make this approach possible. So with that, and as Megan said, please do not hesitate if you have a question as we're going through. Sometimes that's easier along the way to stop and address those. So please feel free to do that and do not hesitate. I've been at UNC. I developed their program in 2011. And before I get into a little bit more of the context of where I developed and established this program, some things to share also about me. I have been teaching and developing curriculum for 20 plus years. I did start as a U.S. Air Force captain, and my typical joke is the federal government said, "You will teach." And I, of course, said, okay, with a smile. But it turned out to be a wonderful experience and ultimately set me on my path. I have taught at the high school level, community college level, and then certainly at the university. And these other things that Megan shared with you in terms of my education, I do like to tell simply my expertise is in how we learn. And as teachers, how do we help others learn? And so that's kind of how I ended up in this place. The first year seminar program that I direct right now, I want to share a little bit around the context because it does align very much in that I firmly believe this approach works with a wide range of students and students who come with different abilities. And so currently our program typically each semester serves about 50% first generation students and 40% students of color. We also do the range of goal students, which is our Go On and Learn program. And these are students with intellectual disabilities all the way to our honors students. So again, a wide range of students that we can use this curriculum with effectively. It is also our first year seminar is a 3-credit, 16-week academic-based program that is part of the general education requirements. The program as a whole is a coordinated curriculum. And then we have doctoral students who teach, who are instructors from specific disciplines. So kind of big picture, that's where, again, the context of where this fits in. So starting off, and you know this, and many institutions, 95% of institutions across the country have programs because they understand that transition to start off with for first-time college students can be a little rough. And so not only do we want them to start off strong in that first year, in that first semester, but then ultimately have the skills so that they can persist over the long term and achieve graduation and achieve their goals. So this is the need, and this is where we start with. But what is the problem around that? Again, we have increased enrollments nationally of underrepresented students, first generation students, students of color, and these increased enrollments, consistently, sometimes these students will be at additional risk, and we need to provide the resources and support that they're going to need to be successful. Now, part of the problem in that, though, is that many first-year seminars do have a very potentially low academic rigor to them, and their objectives, whether it's a 1-credit, getting to know the university type of seminar, to a 3-credit, more rigorous type of course. But in the end, it really does need to prepare them to be able to meet university expectations. Now, what this a lot of times leads to, and maybe you've experienced, is that many times there's not much buy-in from our campus stakeholders, faculty, administrators, and even some of the students, where they will see these seminars or actually take these seminars and feel like it was either just common sense, things that they already knew, or just a waste of time. If you don't have buy-in from your campus stakeholders, it makes it very difficult to get budget, to get the resources you need, and to have successful programs. This was something I knew from the beginning. That was one of my number one jobs, was to get that credibility, to get that buy-in from our campus stakeholders. So my philosophy around this is to balance that challenging college level academics with scaffolded support. And I would tell people when I was first developing this program is that students can come to college and they can ultimately have all the friends in the world, have all the money in the world. But if they can't do the work, there is going to come a point in time where they're not going to be able to stay. And so we do need to be able to support their ability to do college level tasks. Now, the challenging college level academic tasks, I feel like there's lots of faculty out there who definitely will, create challenging courses, but the expectation is students should already know how to do that and make that assumption. And then on the flip side, you have many who are in this discipline, first year seminars, want to help students deeply, provide lots of support, lots of hand-holding, lots of different things. But on the flip side, the work itself is maybe not necessarily challenging in helping them to prepare. And so I believe it's these two things put together that is what's going to help students succeed, both the short term and long term. So my approach in looking at this, and the approach not only is how I develop the curriculum, how I've developed resources over time, I really do follow this 4-step approach. And so for the first thing, and I am going to show how this aligns in the examples that I gave, but the first thing that I want students to understand is that there is literature, there is research that forms the basis for our recommendations. It's not just because Angela or Dr. Vaughan said this is a good idea, but it has a basis and a foundation that's supported by the research. So that's first. But then second, I think this is really important, especially for many of our underrepresented students, showing the research that lets them know that students can learn these skills, that it is possible. I was a high school math teacher for many years, and I'm sure maybe you've said this about yourself or you've heard this before, but I'm just not good at math. And students, that can become a belief. And so I feel like even coming to college, we have many students who have this belief that if other students are doing well, it's just because they're smart. And for those of you who know growth mindset and those kinds of things, that's not necessarily what's going on, right? But many students believe this and believe it strongly. And so sharing with them that research shows that students can learn these skills and it results in real outcomes that can impact their success. So that's second. And then next would be knowing that these are the recommendations. What does that look like? What are the strategies? How can we apply these ideas, these theories, these principles in ways that are going to help them right now in the real world? So, and this is something where instructors do have to be very explicit. Students are not going to take that information necessarily and know exactly what that's going to look like for them. So really giving them real world applications, real world strategies, and actually having the students do those things so they can see for themselves how these things work is another important piece. And then the last piece is those self-regulation skills. So revisiting these strategies, their approaches, how well did that work out for them? Do they need to make changes? Many of us as adults and professionals, we do that just as a normal part of the way we work. I tried this didn't work very well, or this was not very efficient. I need to make these changes. Well, many of our students and young people haven't quite gained those skills. And so we also want to have them try those strategies. I am going to stop just briefly to share with you a big piece I feel in getting buy-in from faculty and others on university campuses, not only mine, but others that I work with, is that does the research support what we are doing and what the strategies we are using? And so I've made it a priority from the very beginning to examine the data, to publish manuscripts, to show how these evidence-based practices work. This is very recent things that I have out there since this past year. I know Megan also has a list, a larger list of my references that I encourage you to take a look at. I tend to do a lot of empirical based studies as well. I'm a statistician. So I want to take just a moment. I won't take a lot of time here, but I will share some of the data that's within these studies. So here's one that we just had done, and it is a quasi-experimental design. That means I did matched control groups. And each of these differences are statistically significant. And this is a small piece of this study, but I wanted to show that we are having an impact on the long term, 4-year persistence. Some of these differences are almost 20% or more in terms of 4-year persistence for our first generation students of color and our undeclared students. 4-year graduation rates are also significant in their difference. Those numbers are pretty low both sides, but 4-year graduation rates typically are going to be a little bit lower. I have another one that shows 5-year. This is another one too I pulled out from a recent study. And I used our conditionally admitted students and our first generation students here and around first term GPA. That is a huge piece in terms of whether students are going to persist. Ultimately, if they end up on academic probation and that first semester, it becomes very difficult for them to dig out of that hole. And so I took a look at this. At the bottom, it shows the 0 credits to 3 credits. That 3 credits is the current program that we're using right now. And it truly shows that even with our students who are at risk here, they may even exceed or become very close to their peers. And then here's the 5-year graduation rates. And again, these are all statistically significant. Some of our probably largest potentially at risk students are our first generation students who come in with a high school GPA of less than 3.0. And our 5-year graduation rates are 20%. And so as a whole, across the board, I'm definitely having an impact. Okay, so before I get into some of these details here, I wanted to give two specific examples that are representative of this approach. And one is goal setting and the other one is our research project. And the other part of this that I'll just share briefly, goals are definitely something that students have been hearing since middle school or even earlier. And I'm very intentional about understanding that when students come to college, they want to know that they are investing their time, effort, and money into new information and to expand their education. And so recognizing, so for example, in goals, SMART goals is been out there for many years. Again, most students have heard of those. I talk about that in more of a historical context, but that's not my focus. Now the tenets are there, definitely. But I don't want students to go, oh, SMART goals, I've heard that before. You have nothing else to teach me or to tell me. And so I try to pay close attention to those things. I want students to understand that we are adding to their knowledge, adding to their skills. I also will put on here that we start with goals in the second week purposefully. We know that goals are tied to motivation. And so we start here to help direct them on their path, to help set some goals for the semester and start to put some plans of action into place for them. We do revisit again goals and motivation after midterms when students are really starting to feel maybe less motivated, maybe a little bit more discouraged. And so we revisit it, which I'll talk some more here. But so for goal setting, I want to share how we approach this. So the first week, we do assign a journal article, and we talk specifically then about goals in the second week. So with the journal article, this is typical experience. Students will read an article and go, I don't know what I just read. I didn't understand it. It was confusing. And we acknowledge that difficulty, right? We know this is going to happen. So we tell them, do the best that you can, take notes the best that you can. And we reassure them that ultimately we will give them additional strategies to help approach that type of reading and at that level. So, but we start there. And this journal article satisfies the first two parts of that approach, the literature and the research and the principles that show why goal setting and particular parts of goal setting are helpful. And then the second part of that does share that these students, can use these interventions and can ultimately have outcomes that are going to help them be successful. So the journal article starting there forms the basis of the approach, as well as the textbook reading that goes with it. The other part that I think is important is holding them accountable. So we do an in-class reading quiz. Now, originally, we did online reading quizzes because, again, we still wanted students to read before they showed up, but it became just another thing for students to forget and then get upset with themselves and then get upset with us. And so it wasn't necessarily serving the purpose we wanted. So what we changed it to is we told them they were going to be pop quizzes, potentially when readings are due, but they would be able to use any of their notes that they take on the reading. And so what happened, even in that second week, usually the day after Labor Day, we have freshman students coming in with their reading notes, having done the reading over a holiday weekend, to take that first quiz. Now they learn very quickly that anytime a reading is due, we're having a reading quiz, which allows us then to talk about their progress on these, talk about their note taking and how well that worked for them. What changes are they seeing over time as they gain more skills in this area? But in the end, it does reinforce that active reading strategies, reading before lectures, is actually helpful in terms of information processing and other things. So this was a big piece of it. But the other one that's important and aligns with how we conduct classes and the pedagogy that we use is that we're not here to outline the chapter for students. We're here to engage in the material. We're here to have discussion. We're here to do activities. We're going to talk about the application. And students need to come to the table with having read some of that background information. So here's one of the examples around the goals as well. And in that week, we do assign their first major assignment, which is a goals paper. And when we do assign it, we also have a discussion. And this is an example of a discussion we would do with students. And I want to point out a couple of things. This aligns very well with the third step in that approach. What are the recommendations and strategies based on the literature? And then how do we use them? So in the article that we give them, it talks about this vision for an ideal future. And so we ask them a little bit about what do you think that means? And how is it related, connecting it to the text, as well as then the specific assignment. So we're asking them to think about what are we asking them to do in the assignment? Why are we asking them to do that in the assignment? And what's the basis for that? Why do you think it was the intervention's most valuable component? Now, this is also knowing students and that we want them to determine for themselves, why would this be important? Why would this be helpful? Again, that's usually more powerful than a professor or somebody else going, this is something that you should do. So, and then we have them apply it. What is your vision for an ideal future? We call this a future narrative, and it is one of the last things that they do in their goals paper. And then continuing on around this, what were the three main findings? Again, going a little bit deeper into the article, why, what do you think they were, and how is this related? So really pushing them to think about different sources and making those connections for themselves in this discussion. Now, some of this, as they're reading their articles too, they will struggle with, and it also helps us to scaffold understanding. How do you approach the article? How do you understand what they're suggesting, what they're recommending? All of this falls into this discussion. Now, the next part of it is the last step of this approach. We are very intentional about not offering something to students and never coming back to it. We want them to examine their use of strategies, their application of it, how well did it work, are there changes we need to make? And so specifically for goals, we will come back at midterms. Motivation, again, is right after midterms. And so I shared here one of the assignments that we have them do, one of the reflections we have them do. And it really gets them through that metacognitive process of, first of all, did I achieve the goal? what did I do? How did I do? Do I need to change some of those things? The obstacles I identified, were they a reality? And so not only for those that were complete, but then things that are in progress. And again, getting them into that habit of, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is helping me to achieve my goals, but do I need to make changes potentially? So the second example I want to share is around our research project. And really, at most universities, students are going to be expected to write and be able to synthesize information and then present that in a paper. And on our campus, many times students, if they don't experience this in their first semester, certainly will by their second semester, where they're going to have a professor that is going to assign a 15-page research paper, but not tell them how to do it. And so we do take this opportunity to walk them through that process. Again, this is a very challenging activity for them. Many have not done work like this, certainly not at this level. But we also want to make sure that we're giving them the support that they need to accomplish it. And so, outline of the approach, we go through, why are you doing, what's the rationale, what are those key components and process to do that, and then what are the resources that you can use. The scaffolded part is that we do break it down into small pieces. And so with each piece, they do get feedback. Lots of written feedback. And then we even have students come in at least once for some verbal feedback on their paper, on the process. We also give class time, which I think is also an important piece of that scaffolded support. So as they're working, they can ask questions and get immediate responses with what they're doing. And so this is an important piece to make sure students understand and start to build self-efficacy for them. When we introduce the research project in the third week, majority of students are pretty nervous and pretty intimidated. And especially since they had just read a journal article and feeling like, wow, this is a little confusing. And here we're saying you're going to go out and get all of these journal articles, synthesize the information, write a paper, and then create an educational research poster from that. And so they start off pretty nervous. But what's so exciting is we go through this process, and by the time we have our research nights, which we have at the university community, we have 500 students showing their research over 2 nights. The university community is invited, our Greeley community is invited, family, friends, they're all invited to come. And what you see there is students excited, engaged, just talking about their research and what they discovered and their ideas around that then once they had done this research and what that means for them. And the other part that's really exciting too is many times students are picking topics that they're passionate about and really can share, their thoughts and how it folds into the information that they found. And so these events are so much fun to go to and to watch them in this process. And we talk to them afterwards and tell them, kind of show that journey that they made, and that first they maybe couldn't even read the article to where they were talking about it in detail with others and very excited about what they found. I think this piece and this event is one of the more significant events, especially for our underrepresented students, because to me, it tells those students you belong, you have a voice, and we are interested in what you have to say. And I think it definitely sets them up going forward. I take care to make sure that we have like our provost and other deans and other faculty and others come and engage and see our students work. These are just some examples from this last fall. Even though we had to make our event not quite as big, I had to make some changes because of COVID, but we still did our events and lower scale. But this is some of the work that our students did. And this was from everyone, again, from our Go On and Learn, our goal students. They all presented as well and did posters all the way to our honors students. And so I am eager. I'm so excited that this fall, hopefully everything will stay back to normal. And this can also, again, be another large event. So applications here, big picture, I think it comes back to that first point that I made around the philosophy is really bringing those two things apart, that challenging academics, but also the scaffolded support and the pedagogy that's going to support their engagement with the material. We need to take ownership of both those parts for students to be successful. And so that's where I do think, and even when I talk with new teachers, new faculty, new doctoral students, really this is usually at the forefront of what I discuss, is how do we increase the challenge for students so they're gaining those skills, but then how am I also going to provide the support necessary to do that. The piece that I know, as again, as a teacher for 20 plus years, is we also as teachers have limited time. And so we have to be smart about how we put in the scaffolding, how we put in the support, because we have a lot of students. And so that's why I think some of this intentional curriculum and intentional discussions during class allows us to do those things a little bit more efficiently with the greatest impact. So to finish up around the resource, and specifically around a textbook that would support this curriculum. When I first got into this position and I was developing this curriculum, I looked around at textbooks. I examined quite a few. And what I felt like is that there really wasn't a college level academic textbook that aligned with this curriculum. I feel like that many of these textbooks in this discipline are written and designed for the lowest reading level intentionally. Many do not include the research or literature that supports it. And then some of them are even to the extent of being a workbook. And I knew this was not going to be helpful, not only because not necessarily aligned with the curriculum, but also a problem in terms of our stakeholders. You know, taking a look at the book, are we doing the things that we're saying we're going to do? And so in designing my textbook, I was very purposeful, like around lots of things. Doing abstract artwork on the front cover instead of a student necessarily in a backpack is where you'll see in a lot of them. But even the content, the vocabulary, purposely left them at a high level to increase their reading fluency and comprehension. Even with my co-author, we had discussions around this specifically of, that's okay if a student in first reading maybe doesn't quite understand. What are the reading strategies that are going to then help them to be able to read it? And so purposely did that. And then teaching those reading strategies to students is an important piece. But I know in terms of the buy-in from stakeholders, this has been a big piece. And whenever I'm discussing this with these groups, I definitely share the textbook that we're using because I think it reinforces it. So along those lines with the approach, again, when I said I use that approach in designing the curriculum, when it came time and I made the commitment to write the textbook, that approach was still there. And so as you see here, the literature is definitely included, sharing the literature that students can learn these skills, and then getting into those real world application of recommendations, and then the self-regulation processes. And our design too is worked out in terms of the semester schedule. One of our last topics is metacognition. And what we can do at that point is show them that they have been doing those metacognitive regulative strategies throughout the semester. And we can pull examples all the way through because that's exactly what we've been asking them to do along the way. And so when we end with metacognition, it really just pulls it all together for students. And there's definitely a lot of those aha moments. I get what you're doing there, Dr. Vaughan. Some other characteristics, we talk about using visual aids, other strategies. So I incorporate like graphic organizers, real world examples. And when we talk about how does metacognition, knowledge of person, knowledge of strategy, all those things, what does that really look like? I intentionally make sure that there's concrete examples throughout so students can understand how this might apply. I also understand in working in this discipline for many years, going to the FYE conference every February, that there are a lot of people who teach this course, and not necessarily just faculty. It could be adjuncts, could be doctoral students, it could be student affairs staff, it could be advisors. I know there's some programs even out there that actually use undergraduate peers to work in some of these programs. And so I intentionally put some additional readings because I recognize that for some, they might be learning some of these background principles, theories as well. And I wanted to make sure they had some resources that were going to help them do that. Most recently, in our second edition, I did add a couple of topics that I think are also important for students as they're transitioning. One is introductions to diversity, and then wellness. Both of these are definitely, just as introductions to diversity, definitely an introduction to some terms, but more importantly, this idea of having great discussions, perspective taking, critical thinking. Truly, that was my focus, in that students need to be able to engage with others in productive conversations and dialogue. And so that's its intent. And then wellness, we definitely incorporate it throughout the semester, but also getting into some very specific ideas and concepts around wellness. So now that I'm glad I was able to keep going and got through the Zoom troubles, but I will open it up to any questions that you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angela. That was lovely. We do have some questions here. First one is, initially, when you created this course, how did you get it approved?
So one of the things that was very important was sharing the philosophy with the leadership. And the administrators definitely were a little bit more open-minded, let's say, than compared to faculty at first. And as a former military, I also shared, the ideas around my exact example I use. When I'm training troops in the field, we're not, at the pool sipping margaritas. We're doing the work. We're training in the work. And so I shared that philosophy with them. I shared some initial curriculum. I did take our general education requirements and those objectives, those learning outcomes, and tied them directly to our course objectives and how we were going to fill those outcomes, how we were going to fulfill them. So I showed that alignment. Now, that got my initial approval, but to go to then my next approval, which was full 3 credits in the liberal arts or general education requirements, I had to start showing some data. I had to start showing some of my research around it. And so I pulled in these other pieces and continued to, again, share with our faculty, our administrators, in the work that we were doing. It also is helpful, at this point when we have our research nights, and I try to invite maybe even new faculty, new administrators, so they can see for themselves the work that we're doing. And so I think those pieces are really important.
Lovely. All right, let's see here. Okay, here's another one. Who do you actually have teaching the course at your school?
Right, so at our university, we do have doctoral programs, and we actually have quite a few doctoral programs in educational psychology, special education, counselor education, and supervision. And so they actually go through a competitive process to teach in this program. And I give them very comprehensive training around teaching, around pedagogy, lesson planning, engaging students, classroom management. And so it's additional training then for them as they look to become faculty later on. And so we do about 50 hours actually in the summer. And then we meet every week during the semester concurrently. I recognize that there are lots of different programs who use different people as their instructors, many times faculty as well. And I know that for some faculty or even some student affairs people who teach, a lot of times they can be just say, you're going to go do this now. And they lack some of the resources of even where do I start? How do I share this material? What could that look like? And so the framework that I've built, not only with the textbook, is a complete coordinated curriculum, lesson plans for every day of the semester, all sorts of different things. So ultimately, people can come in, they're able to get the materials and do their program.
Very nice. Now, you kind of talked about getting buy-in with stakeholders and getting that initial approval. But I'm sure you've experienced it when you've talked about your approach to the first year seminar, that you kind of encounter, I'm sure, a lot of surprise, kind of the, well, these kids can't, that's those are some pretty high bars there. So how do you just deal with that general opposition to these principles?
Well, for one, I do think, again, the data is important. And that is why I tend to do a lot of publications around our underrepresented students to show not only are they being successful in that first semester, but then they're being successful long term. But then I go many times throughout the semester, I go and observe classes. And although it's anecdotal, I have examples in my pocket of where students are stepping up and sharing. An instructor will ask a question in the class, and one of our trio students, so first generation low income student who's in our trio program, goes, yeah, but the textbook was saying this, that, and the other about, so how does it relate to this? And there's a couple of key things here that I've learned in my teaching. First of all, you've got to give opportunities for students to surprise us and to meet those expectations. And so you got to put it out there to even give them that opportunity. And I do believe a genuine expectation that they can, right? So giving them those opportunities. So the data and then sharing the students' work. In fact, my hallway out in front of my office, all research posters from my students. And I encourage people to come out to take a look at the work that they're doing. So I'm a marketer, right? I have to really get out there. I have to market the work we're doing. And usually it comes down not to the work I'm doing, but what is the work that the students are doing, and really sharing that.
Wonderful. We have a question from Joy over here in the chat. She's wondering if the course is mandatory for students, and is the course in any staff or faculty job description?
You froze on the last part of that question. I heard required, and then I didn't hear the rest of that.
Sure. Is the course mandatory for students, and is it in any faculty job descriptions?
Okay. So it is not required for all students. There are certain groups that are required, like our trio students are required, our undeclared students are required, our goal students are required, and then others are highly recommended. So like our pre-nursing students, some semesters there's a quarter of our population that's taking it, are pre-nursing students. It's a very competitive program on our campus. Many people would love for it to be required for entering freshmen, and we continuously have those discussions with leadership. I'm sure, like many of y'all, the pandemic has hit your university, has hit our university. So even budget-wise, there's some challenges there. So not required. And then as far as for faculty, it is definitely part of mine. Like I said, I am tenured faculty in our Education and Behavioral Sciences College. And so currently, because I have doctoral students that are teaching it, it's not part of others' faculty. I could definitely see, and I know that there are programs out there that use faculty. And I also think that can be a great tool in terms of that connection with students in the college and in programs. I think that can be very helpful for them. But again, I think there's some faculty that are put into this where this isn't their background. And these types of things can really support them in supporting students.
Perfect. All right, any other questions? Looks like that's going to wrap it up for today. But, oh, we do have another question. Never mind. Which office oversees?
So I am in, like I said, the College of Education and Behavioral Sciences. The department I'm in may sound a little strange. I'm in Applied Psychology and Counselor Education. And the reason I am there is, first of all, they were supporting my program from the beginning. And a good majority of my teachers, my instructors, come from their department. And when I was at the University of Texas at Austin, actually the Ed Psych was part of those programs, similar programs. And so it was a good fit. And especially since we didn't really have another place, because I'm kind of this unique person, tenured faculty in this discipline. And so there wasn't really another place that was a good fit for me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone again so much for joining us for today's webinar. If you have any
I got another one
about Angela's publication or the webinar itself, you can contact Jenna at JLAURITZEN@kendallhunt.com. We will be following up with you in the coming days, as I mentioned before, to send you some additional resources related to today's material, as well as to provide you with the recording. But thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.